How could teachers elicit good responses from the students? What strategies could be utilized by these teachers to lead the students formulate good answers? And what are the best types of questions that teachers should use in the classroom discussion? These are what we are going to discuss today. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and welcome to Joyce University. In my previous video, I already have enumerated the different purposes of questioning in the classroom discussion. And I also have reiterated that the quality of questions teachers ask could definitely lead to the quality of teaching and learning process. That's why I told you that it is a must for teachers to develop the skill of questioning so that the teachers could get good answers from the students, could motivate the students to learn a lot more, to help students recall various information, and help students critical and creative thinking skills be developed, because those are the different functions of questioning in the classroom. That's why today I would like to come up with the second part of that video, because I'll be discussing the different types of questions that teachers could use in the teaching and learning process. The first type of question that I'll be discussing is the factual questions, or others would call it close-ended questions or convergent questions. And among the different types of questions, I think this is one of the easiest to formulate, easiest to construct, and easiest to assess at the same time, because there is only one answer. There is a specific answer for these kinds of questions. Now, these factual questions are asked by teachers to facilitate recall of specific information previously learned by the students. These factual questions would also help teachers assess their students' retention, their students' mastery of a certain content, or students' ability to memorize isolated bits of information or factual information. So these are the questions that usually start with who, what, or when, or questions like what I said that have definite answers. So like what I said, it is just very easy to answer, because so long as you memorize the content, you can already answer factual questions. But even if this is the easiest, that these questions are the easiest questions to formulate, to ask, and to assess, these are still very important questions, because before a teacher could ask more complicated questions or could ask follow-up questions, the students should memorize or should know the foundation. Alright? You can never answer more complicated questions if you do not know the basic information. So that's how important factual questions are. So you ask these factual questions if you would want, or if the teacher would want to assess simple bits of information, like when the teacher asks, during which century Shakespeare lived, or what is the Spanish verb meaning to run? Okay, these are questions that have definite answer. The second one is the teacher would ask factual questions to know if a students memorize facts that are organized into logical order, like what are the steps a bill goes through before it becomes a law. Okay, the answer might be lengthier compared to the previous examples, but there is still specific answers presented. Okay, there is a definite process being followed for a bill to become a law. Again, still factual question. Or what is the commercial method for producing hydrochloric acid? So long as you have presented the methods involved, or the steps involved, or the processes involved, and very definitive siya, these questions fall under factual questions. Okay? Next, The second type of question that I'll be discussing today is probing questions. And these probing questions, from the term probe, is students are given opportunities to explore their initial answers, to explain or to elaborate their answers. They are given opportunities to clarify their thoughts at the same time, okay? So, a lot of instances, the initial responses or the initial answers kasi of the students are not that well constructed, not that well thought of. So, the students, through these probing questions, will be given the opportunity to explore their initial comments, to explore their initial answers. That is why probing questions should be asked by teachers to get students more involved in critical analysis of their own answers or of their own ideas. And there are different types of probing questions, the first of which is clarifying questions. And these clarifying questions will allow students to clarify or to elaborate their answers. And this is done by means of asking more information from them. So I would like to present you this example. Teacher would ask, could you please develop your ideas further? Or could you provide an example of that concept? And the students say, it was obvious that the crew had gone insane. The teacher again asked, what is the legal definition of insane? And student would say, it was a violation of the due process. The teacher again asked, can you explain why? So if you try to take a look at this conversation between the teacher and the students, alright, the students are given enough opportunities to explain the first answer or the initial answer. And the explanation of the students will be based on the questions given by the teacher. So imagine how important the questions are for students to elaborate their points. And it has to be, or the teacher has to ask good questions so that students would be led to the formulation of good answers. The teachers or the students will never give good answers if teachers do not have this skill. So that is an example of clarifying questions. And another example of that would be when a teacher would ask, what exactly do you mean by that? Or, will you please rephrase your statement? Could you elaborate on that particular point? What do you mean when you said that? For you, what is the meaning of the term that you use? So these are all four clarifying questions. And if the teachers are very good at asking this kind of questions, then you would be helping students formulate good answers, and you would be helping them realize that they could actually explain and they could actually think critically. Alright, that's clarifying questions. The second type of probing question is refocusing questions. From the term refocusing, you only have to redirect the responses of the students. There are a lot of times na ang mga sagot ng mga estudyante ay very irrelevant. These are off-tangent responses. And your job as a teacher is to redirect that or to find connection of those irrelevant answers to the topic at hand. Or your job is to lead that that response that is out of context to within the context. That's why it's refocusing. Okay? So the teacher could refocus or could encourage the student to tie her response to the content being discussed. Okay? Example. If that is really true, what are the implications of that answer, of your idea to this topic at hand? I appreciate your answer, but could you relate that to our lesson? Let's analyze your answer by means of making use of this topic at hand as our basis. Okay? So you have to refocus questions. They would say that there are actually no irrelevant questions being asked in the classroom. kahit na napakalayo ng sagot ng estudyante sa pinag-uusapan, the teacher should have the ability to make that irrelevant answer relevant. And that would become possible through the teacher's questioning skill. And there are also some teachers na nagagalit kapag yung sagot ng estudyante nila ay napakalayo sa pinag-uusapan. And the teacher would even tell students that the students are not listening sa discussion at hand. But you know, there are a lot of times, this is based on experience, maraming mga pagkakataon that teachers think that the answer of the students is irrelevant, primarily because the teacher does not even think about its relevance. Sometimes teachers are just very focused on this particular path na nakakalimutan natin that for a certain student to achieve the outcomes of the day, hindi pare-pareho yung gusto nilang daanan. Other students would really pass by this particular straight road, going to the outcome at hand, but other students would try to detour. Dito sila dadaan, pero isa rin yung lalabasan nila. And so as teachers, you really have to refocus thinking. And you have to make sure that no matter how irrelevant the answer may seem, okay, it is your responsibility to help that students refocus or be redirected to what you would want them to go. And that's one of the reasons why refocusing questions I needed. The next type of probing question is prompting or rephrasing questions, okay? So these questions are used when students provide incorrect answers or could not provide you with anything. So instead of telling the student that the student is wrong, or that instead of calling another student to answer immediately, then you have to ask prompting, or you have to rephrase your questions. Maybe the question is not properly understood. Maybe the construction of the question is not comprehensible. Those are some issues. Or maybe the question is too high. The students could no longer, too high to be understood by the students. So you've got to ask prompting questions. I would like also to emphasize that kapag mali yung sinabi ng estudyante mo, yung sagot ng estudyante mo, teacher does not have the right to say stupid. That's a wrong answer. Okay? You're such a fool for believing that way. Tanga or bobo, those are the things that should not be used by teachers in any instances in the classroom. So instead of just calling immediately another student to recite, then you have to prompt the student. So paano tayo mag-prompt or mag-rephrase ng questions? Una, the teacher should provide some information to help students come up with the answer, meaning you would be leading or guiding the students to the right answer. I would like to present an example. The teacher says, "How far has the ball fallen after 3 seconds?" And the student said, "I have no idea, ma'am." The teacher says, "Okay, let's break down the question, Anne. How do we measure distance?" So, bakit kaya prompting question yon? Take a look at the conversation. The teacher is trying her best to lead the students, or to guide the students to the correct answer. So, break down nga yung question, how do we measure distance? Because when the student is able to measure the distance, then the student could eventually get the answer in the initial question, which is how far has the ball fallen after 3 seconds. Okay? Another example. Teacher says, "John, what is the square root of 94? John says, "I don't know." And the teacher says, "Well, what's the square root of 100? John says, 10. The teacher says, "And the square root of 81? John says, 9. Then, what do you think now is the square root of 94? And John said, "Mom, maybe it's in between 9 and 10. Oh, see? All students, they have something to say. all of them, they have ideas to share. Alright? It's just that teachers must be very patient to help students arrive at a possible answer or the correct answer. Do not give up immediately. Do not give up immediately when students would say, Mom, I do not know the answer. Mom, I do not have ideas. Those are impossible things to be, those are very impossible talaga. If students have something to say, all of them have something to say, but it takes a very good teacher, okay, to encourage students to recite in the classroom discussion. Another example for this one, as regards rephrasing or rewording the statement, the question, because maybe the question may be poorly understood or maybe poorly stated, so you have to rephrase it. So the teacher asks, Jane, what is neurosis? And the student does not give anything, does not answer the question. Maybe too difficult to answer what is neurosis. Kahit ako hindi ko alam ang neurosis. And the teacher again says, what are the identifying characteristics of a neurotic person? If the students does not even say a thing, then you better look into what is this neurotic person all about. When they say that the person is neurotic. So those are the series of questions that would lead students to the final answer or to the correct answer. The next kind of probing question that I would like to present is redirecting to another student. So from the term redirecting, the teacher was asked someone to answer a particular question, then after which the teacher calls another student to react to react to the response given by the classmate. Okay? Or an example of this would be, the teacher would ask, Ali, do you agree with Mark's comment? From your experience, Aisha, that's what Vito said seem true? So can you give an example of the concept that Pat mentioned? So this redirecting question, aside from you are giving opportunities for the students to analyze or to evaluate the responses of their classmates, you also would assess students if they are listening or not to the responses given by their own classmates. And they tend to analyze critically the response given by their classmates. So, madaming pwedeng maging function ng redirecting question na ito. The third category or the third type of questions is what we call divergent questions. And this is very much different from that of convergent questions. In the convergent questions, there is a particular response needed by the teachers, but in these divergent questions, the students are given opportunities to go beyond mere memorization to true thinking. So the students are given more opportunities to go beyond recall of information, to go beyond specific answers. Here in the divergent questions, students are given time to explore their answers, to give concrete explanations of their own responses, and to explore possibilities at the same time. Usually, divergent questions are based on hypothesis, hypothetical. So, ito yung mga questions na may ganitong format. What if X happened instead? What would that lead to? Suppose Z were in charge. How would that change things? So, what would happen if we switch A and B? If this took place today, what would it be like? Or if mosquitoes are bigger than humans, what would happen? If monkeys or apes did not evolve, what do you think is the picture of the earth? So, very hypothetical. There are no wrong or right answers. These are merely opinions of the students, and a lot of students would love this because even if they do not memorize content or they do not have much knowledge about basic information or core subjects, the basics of information of the core subjects, if the questions are like this, then they are given opportunities to explore possibilities. Okay? So sabi niya, what if humans are, what if aliens invade Earth? What would happen? What do you think will happen if there is no death? Okay, so those are very good questions that require a lot of critical and creative thinking. And these divergent questions also are my favorite because they would help, these questions would help students explore a lot of possibilities. Their creative thinking would be at work. Alright, so these are the divergent questions. And these divergent questions often require students to analyze, to synthesize, to be imaginative, to be creative, to find relationship of everything, to find cause and effect, to provoke deeper thoughts. So, another question. If you were stuck in an island and the only tool you had was a screwdriver, what use might you make of it? Okay, weird question, but could actually elicit very good responses. You know, I tried asking these questions to a lot of my students in my speech class, and I was so fascinated with their answers. Their answers are out of this world, but may possibilities na pwedeng gawin at may katotohanan na rin at talagang pinag-isipan ng maayos. So I love asking questions like this if I really would want my students' critical and creative thinking be evaluated. Alright? So next, we also have higher order questions. These naman questions require students to figure out answers rather than remembering them. These answers would allow your students to make judgment about something. They will be judging the value of an idea, maybe about a candidate, or they would be judging the solution of a problem. They'd be evaluating as well questions that do not have single answers. So these are 4 higher order questions because they fall under high order thinking skills. Now, like questions that would evaluate something. Then you would ask your students, which of the 2 books do you believe contributed most to the understanding of Catholicism? These high-order questions also would allow students to infer. Drawing inferences would mean you would ask them to examine a particular person, maybe to draw conclusion out of what is given them. Like when you say, we have examined the qualities of these world leaders. We have examined the qualities these world leaders have in common. What might we conclude in general about qualities necessary for leadership? So, if you try to take a look at these inferential questions, you would ask your students to evaluate, okay, the qualities of persons, to evaluate the leadership qualities of these persons that are needed for a certain country to prosper or to be developed. Another, you could also ask them to compare and to contrast, to look into the similarities, to the relationship of things like, is a mussel the same thing as a clam? O, diba? Very difficult question. What I know is that this mussel and clam both have shells. But other than that, I do not know anything. So for a student to answer these similarities or differences of a mussel and a clam, then this student should have, read and should have understood the similarities and the similarities of, things like this. Another evaluative question or another question for higher order thinking was when you ask students to solve a particular problem. Like, suppose you grow up with the idea that dogs were bad. Out of the many dogs you came in contact with, none bit you when you were quite young. How would you react towards dogs now? Would the type, size of the dog makes any difference as to how you react? Explain the notion of prejudices using this example. See, by just looking into examples with like a dog, you would already lead students to to have notions about prejudices, because you're talking about types or size or etc. That could mean that would lead to discrimination or to prejudices. And before a student could answer a question like this student should really think well, should really formulate good reasons, should really formulate good judgment and the like. So that is an these are examples of questions under higher order thinking questions. And the last one is what we call affective questions, another one of the most important, because these questions would elicit expressions of attitude, of values or feelings of the student. So like when you'd be asking them about the lessons learned in a story, or about the morals of the story or of the scenario presented, you would be asking them how they feel about a certain scenario, or is that important to them. So these are affective because it has something to do with the heart, with the values that you uphold, with the lesson or the morals that you get from what you are learning. So these are all under affective questions. At ang pinaka-best na question na pwede mong gawin sa klase mo would be the combination of all these questions. You ask low-level questions, and then you ask divergent questions, you ask probing questions, until such time that you'd be asking affective questions. If you try to take a look at the kinds of questions I presented, those kinds of questions really are based on the importance, or arranged as to the least important to the most important. That before you could ask affective questions, before you could ask students, oh, how do you feel about that, you have to start asking factual questions, and then start asking probing questions, help students formulate their own answers, lead them to correct answers, and after which give them open-ended questions or divergent questions. You ask them to explore possibilities, you ask them to explain their ideas, to explain on their own answers and evaluate their own answers. And then you go into higher order level, would you be asking them questions which are very difficult to answer, questions that need creative thinking and critical thinking, and then you end up asking affective questions, because these are questions that would stay in them forever. Affective questions, or the answers to these affective questions, are what would stay in them forever. Like what we always say, they might be forgetting all the factual information that they would get from you or that they would learn from you, but they would never forget the kind of person you ask them to become, or you let them become, because of the kind of questions that you ask. So these are the different types of questions that teachers, whether bago or distinguished na teachers na, should be able to ask to students, so that participation, retention, critical and creative thinking, development of the critical and creative thinking would be developed. Okay, so I hope you have learned something from this.